dangerous criminal who belongs in prison. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. According to an article written in the Daily Beast, and I'm going to read the article in its entirety, and then you be the individual that determines if the Daily Beast is right or if the Daily Beast is wrong. So according to the Daily Beast, once again, the headline of the article reads, "Lock him up. Trump is a dangerous criminal who belongs in prison." The special counsel's latest indictment shows plainly that the former president attempted a coup, and violence was always a part of his plan to stay in power. The four-count indictment special counsel Jack Smith handed down against Donald Trump alleges that on January 6, approximately 2 hours after the mob broke into the Capitol, quote, the defendant, close quote, joined others in the outer office to watch the attack on television. Quote, "See, this is what happens when they try to steal an election. These people are angry. These people are really angry about it. This is what happens," close quote, the defendant said. This is what Trump wanted. He wanted his supporters to be angry, furious, and incensed if he lost the 2020 election. That was the whole point. This is what Trump wanted from the moment he began lying about a, quote, stolen, close quote, election months before the 2020 election. He wanted violence, he wanted chaos, he wanted his supporters to be so damned pissed off that they would use violence to keep him in office. He wanted, as Smith spelled out in the indictment, quote, to create an intense atmosphere of mistrust and anger, close quote. This was always his plan. Violence was always his ace in the hole if everything else he tried to do to keep himself in power failed. Please don't breeze past this fact. The former president of the United States believed violence was ultimately how he would execute his attempted coup. He incited that violence for months, and he exploited that violence on January 6th. You can't read this 45-page indictment and not understand that Donald Trump tried everything he could to do to overturn the election results. Knowing his argument was based on nothing and that he'd use his power as commander-in-chief of the armed forces to remain in office. I repeat, Trump wanted to use the military. Per the indictment, when Trump was warned by his deputy White House counsel on January 3 that there was no, quote, outcome determinative fraud in the election, close quote, and that if Trump remained in office, there would be, quote, riots in every major city in the United States, close quote. The unnamed conspirator 4 responded, quote, well, Deputy White House counsel, that's why there's an Insurrection Act, close quote. The indictment paints a picture of Trump and his co-conspirators systematically trying everything possible to overturn the election results, making false claims, pushing election officials in various states to ignore the vote counts, creating slates of fraudulent electors, and then pressuring top officials in the Justice Department to lie and conduct sham investigations. Trump's penultimate play to stay in power was to pressure the vice president to fraudulently alter the election results. And Trump, true to form, repeatedly threatened violence to try to convince then Vice President Mike Pence to do something he had no authority to do. On January 5, in one of the last of the VP, Trump, quote, grew frustrated, close quote, and told the VP that if he didn't do what Trump wanted, he'd have to publicly criticize the VP. Upon hearing this, the VP's chief of staff was concerned for the vice president's safety and alerted the head of the vice president's Secret Service detail. With none of his overtures to the VP working, Trump and his co-conspirators employed their final play to keep Trump in power. They unleashed the dogs of violence. On the morning of January 6, he directly incited his supporters to engage in violence to stop the proceedings at the Capitol. In his speech that morning, he lied to supporters. He falsely told them that the vice president had the authority to stop the proceedings and that the VP might, in fact, alter the election results. Co-conspirators 1 and 2 also lied about the VP in their speeches that morning to the same crowd. Trump then directed his supporters to go to the Capitol to obstruct the certification proceedings and exert pressure on the VP to take the fraudulent actions Trump already knew the VP had previously refused to do. Violence. This was a traitor's final play. It's really what underlined everything Trump had done and said from that moment in July 2020, when he said the only way he could lose the election as if it were stolen. He planted the seeds of violence before a vote had even been cast. In the indictment, Jack Smith says the whole point of the defendant's lies was to be, quote, destabilizing, close quote, to cause violence, quote. We fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, close quote. Trump charged his supporters that morning as he pointed them to the Capitol and told them to go, quote, take back their country, end quote. And of course, the crowd promised to go to the Capitol with them, but never did. Pardon me, I think this is what Jack Smith said. Quote, and of course, the crowd promised to go to the Capitol with them, but never did. When violence unfolded at the Capitol, Trump refused to stop it. He smiled and watched it. People have long been confused about why Trump just sat there in the White House all afternoon, completely unperturbed by what was happening. There should be no confusion. This is what he wanted. This was the plan. And during the violence, he continued to spur it on attacking the VP tweet accusing him of not having the courage to act. See, quote, see, this is what happens when you steal an election. These people are angry, said the President of the United States, knowing it was a lie. Later that night, the indictment alleges Trump and his cronies further exploited the violence of that day. As violence ensued, the defendant and co-conspirators exploited this disruption by redoubling efforts to levy false claims of election fraud and convince members of Congress to further delay the certification based on these claims. They were still calling lawmakers to further perpetuate the big lie, even after the violence at the Capitol. One of the most frightening lines in the indictment was a reference to a January 4 conversation between the defendant's senior counselor and co-conspirator number 2, during which the senior advisor said no one would support the defendant proposal to have the VP alter the election results, and if VP did it, you're going to cause riots in the street. Co-conspirator 2 responded that there had previously been points in the nation's history where violence was necessary to protect the public. In other words, violence was necessary. This, in essence, was Trump's doctrine. Judge Tanya Chutkin, who's been chosen to preside over Trump's trial for this indictment and who has presided over a number of the trials for the January 6 defendants, said this during one of those earlier January 6 trials, quote, it has to be made clear that trying to violently overthrow the government, trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power, and assaulting law enforcement officers in that effort is going to be met with absolutely certain punishment, close quote. That is what Donald Trump did. This was his plan all along. He wanted, he needed, depended upon, encourage, and incite violence. And he was prepared to order the military to act violently on his behalf. It's bad enough that Trump refused to concede and accept his election loss. It's bad enough that he refused to participate in the peaceful transfer of power. It's bad enough that he lied about the election and tried to pressure others to engage in fraudulent activities to overturn the election. But it's treacherous that he relied on the threat of violence rather than concede, he lost a free and fair election in the United States of America. We must not become so inured to Trump's madness that we normalize what he's done. He tried to violently overthrow our government, and as Judge Chukin said, quote, he must be met with absolutely certain punishment, close quote. This is the entire article that was written in the Daily Beast. So if you'd like to check it out for yourself, just look up Daily Beast. The article was written by Joe Walsh on the 2nd of August at 12:39 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender, never quit.